Your plates triggered a fraud alert in our system. Keep your hands where I can see them and answer my questions directly.
I am Chief Justice Camille Mercer of the State Appellate Division. Those are my official judiciary plates. Whatever your system is telling you is wrong.
Identity misuse cases often involve people who know the plates they're using and have an explanation ready.
Patrol Officer Trent Colby had stopped 43 vehicles in the Crestwood Gate District in 6 months using automated plate reader alerts. And not once had he waited for a system confirmation before pulling someone over. The night he lit up his blues behind a black Audi A6 on Hargrove Terrace and told its driver her government plates were flagged for identity fraud, he spoke with the certainty of a man who had never once been wrong in his own mind. He called backup before he even ran a manual check, turned a quiet residential street into a scene, and handcuffed a woman on her own front curb while her neighbors watched. What Trent Colby didn't know was that the woman he had just placed in the back of his patrol car was the Chief Justice of the State Appellate Division. And the alert he had used to justify every single action that night had been cleared as a false positive 11 minutes before he made the stop. Before we go further, what city or country are you watching from? Drop it in the comments. We love seeing where you're tuning in from. And if you believe that a badge and a broken algorithm should never be enough to put an innocent woman in handcuffs outside her own home, hit that like button and subscribe to Resurrected Justice. Because on this channel, the record always gets corrected. Crestwood Gate is the kind of neighborhood that exists in that particular pocket of American geography where old money and new infrastructure meet quietly and without ceremony. It sits in the northwestern corner of Halden County, accessible from the main road through a single entry point on Crestwood Gate Boulevard, where a manned security booth checks every vehicle that doesn't have a resident transponder. The streets inside have names like Hargrove Terrace, Alderton Ridge, and Whitfield Crest Drive, and they curve gently through mature oak trees and manicured lawns in a way that makes the whole place feel deliberately unhurried. Properties here average $1.8 million. The streetlights are warm and evenly spaced. On a Thursday evening in early April, with the temperature sitting at 61 degrees and the last of the daylight fading behind the tree line on the western edge of the neighborhood, it was the kind of street where nothing was supposed to happen. Camille Mercer was 52 years old, and she had been navigating spaces that required her to prove herself since before she had the credentials to do it easily. She had a law degree from Georgetown, a 26-year career in the state judiciary that had taken her from clerk to associate judge to her current position as Chief Justice of the State Appellate Division, and a professional record that included presiding over more than 400 written opinions, 11 of which had been cited in federal proceedings. She was the senior judicial officer in her district. She was 2 years into a second term. And on the evening of April 3rd, she was doing nothing more consequential than driving home from a late administrative session at the Halden County Courthouse on Meridian Avenue, her black Audi A6 moving quietly through the familiar curves of Hargrove Terrace toward the house she had lived in for 14 years. Her official government plates were clearly visible. They had been on the vehicle for 3 years without a single flag. Her registration was current. Her judiciary parking credentials were visible on the dashboard. She had her window down slightly because the evening air was mild and she had been inside a courthouse since 7 that morning and she wanted to feel it. She was less than 400 meters from her own driveway when the patrol lights came on behind her. Trent Colby had been with the Halden County Sheriff's Patrol Division for 7 years, assigned to the Crestwood Gate corridor for the last 2 of them under a county contract that gave his unit jurisdiction over the neighborhood's internal roads and the quarter-mile of Hargrove Terrace that connected the main gate to the residential grid. He was 34 years old, and he operated with the specific confidence of someone who had been given a tool and never once been told to question whether the tool was working correctly. That tool, in this case, was the Meridian Autoscan Plate Recognition System, a networked license plate reader mounted on his cruiser's dashboard that cross-referenced passing plates against a county database of flagged vehicles in real time. The system was efficient. It was also, as internal audit records would later confirm, generating false positive alerts at a rate of nearly 12% on government-issued plates, due to a formatting error in the database that had been reported to the county IT division 4 months earlier and had not yet been corrected. The alert that came through on Camille's plates at 6:44 p.m. that evening read, "Possible fraudulent government tag. Identity misuse. Verify and detain. Trent looked at it for approximately 4 seconds. He did not call dispatch to confirm the alert status. He did not run a manual plate check through the secondary system. He hit his lights and pulled out behind the Audi. Camille saw the lights in her rearview mirror and pulled over immediately, easing the Audi to the right side of Hargrove Terrace in front of a property she recognized as belonging to the Caldwell family, who had a stone mailbox at the end of their driveway and a motion light that clicked on as she stopped. She put the car in park, kept both hands on the wheel, and waited. She was not nervous. She had no reason to be nervous. She assumed this was a mistake that would take 2 minutes to resolve. Trent approached her window with his hand already resting near his belt. He looked at the plates, looked at her, and spoke before she had a chance to say anything. He told her that her plates had triggered a fraud alert in the system, that this was a serious matter, and that he needed her to keep her hands visible and answer his questions directly. His tone was not the tone of someone conducting a verification. It was the tone of someone who had already conducted one in his own head and was now informing her of the result. Camille told him clearly and without any agitation that she was Chief Justice Camille Mercer of the State Appellate Division, that those were her official judiciary plates, and that she believed there had been a system error. She said it the way someone says something they expect to immediately resolve the situation. Trent looked at her for a moment and then told her that identity misuse cases often involved individuals who were aware of the plates they were using and had prepared a cover story in advance. He said it like he was sharing a professional insight. Camille looked at him. She looked at him the way a person looks at something that has just told them everything they need to know about what the next few minutes are going to look like. Behind her, a second set of lights appeared at the top of Hargrove Terrace. Officer Bowen had arrived. There is a specific kind of danger that comes not from one officer making a bad decision, but from two officers agreeing with each other before either of them has checked the facts. When Bowen stepped out of his cruiser and walked toward Trent on the side of Hargrove Terrace, he didn't ask what the alert said. He didn't ask whether the plates had been manually verified. He looked at the situation. A black woman pulled over, his colleague already at her window with his hand near his belt, and he stepped into formation the way people do when they have decided that supporting the person beside them matters more than understanding the situation in front of them. That decision, made in about 4 seconds on a quiet residential street, is what turned a correctable mistake into something that couldn't be taken back. Camille tried again. She told both officers calmly that she was Chief Justice of the State Appellate Division, that her credentials were in her bag on the passenger seat, and that she would like to reach for them so she could show them exactly who she was. Trent told her to keep her hands where he could see them. She said she understood that, and asked clearly if she had permission to reach for her bag slowly with both officers watching. Trent looked at Bowen. Bowen said nothing. Trent looked back at Camille and told her that any movement toward the passenger side of the vehicle without prior clearance would be treated as a non-compliant action under their stop protocol. Camille asked him to define what prior clearance meant in this situation. He didn't answer that either. What was happening on that curb was not confusion. It was a system running exactly as it had been allowed to run. Trent had a protocol that let him treat an unverified alert as confirmed evidence. Bowen had a habit of backing up his colleague without asking questions. And the two of them together had created a situation where a woman with 26 years in the state judiciary was sitting in her own car outside her own home, being told she could not reach for the credentials that would have ended the stop immediately. A neighbor named Gerald Caldwell, whose property Camille had pulled up in front of, came out of his front door and walked to the end of his driveway. He recognized her. He had lived 4 houses down from her for 9 years, and he knew exactly who she was. He told the officers from the edge of his lawn that she was Chief Justice Mercer and that she lived on this street. Trent told him to step back and stay out of a law enforcement matter. Gerald said he wasn't trying to interfere. He just wanted them to know who they were talking to. Bowen walked toward him and told him that if he didn't return to his property, he would be obstructing an active stop. Gerald stepped back. He didn't go inside. He stood at the edge of his driveway and watched because that was the only thing left that he could do. 2 more neighbors had come outside by this point. A woman from the property across the street stood on her porch with her phone in her hand. A man 2 doors down stood in his open garage watching without speaking. Nobody else intervened after seeing what happened to Gerald. The street had understood the message. Camille made one more attempt. She spoke directly to Trent and told him that she understood he was following a protocol, but that the alert on her plates was a system error and that if he called dispatch and asked them to manually verify the plate status, they would confirm it within 60 seconds. Trent told her that dispatch verification did not override a detain instruction generated by an active system alert. That sentence, delivered with complete confidence on the side of a residential street at 6:51 p.m., was the most important thing Trent Colby said that entire night, because it meant that no matter what the facts were, he had already decided the system was more reliable than the person sitting in front of him. He told her to step out of the vehicle. She did. She kept her hands visible the entire time, and when she was standing on the curb in front of her neighbor's stone mailbox, Trent told her he was placing her in temporary detainment pending fraud verification and reached for his handcuffs. Camille said nothing. She put her hands behind her back and let it happen, because she already knew that the camera on his dashboard had been recording since the moment he hit his lights. The dashcam footage was requested by Internal Affairs Investigator Price at 9:14 a.m. the following morning. Not because the department wanted to look at it, because 3 separate neighbors had already filed complaints before the sun came up. 2 local journalists had made calls to the county communications office before 8, and somebody inside the precinct had quietly sent a tip to the Halden County Civil Oversight Board before anyone had even finished their first cup of coffee. By the time Price sat down with the footage, the story was already moving faster than the department could manage it. The footage showed everything. It showed Camille pulling over immediately and cleanly, no hesitation, no delay. It showed her hands on the wheel before Trent even reached her window. It showed her telling him clearly who she was within the first 40 seconds of the stop. It showed her asking twice, calmly and specifically, for permission to reach for her credentials, and it showed Trent denying that request both times without explanation. It showed Gerald Caldwell walking to the end of his driveway to identify her and being told to step back. And it showed Camille standing on the curb with her hands already behind her back before Trent had finished his sentence, cooperating completely with a detainment that had no legal foundation to stand on. But the footage was not the hardest part of what Price found that morning. The hardest part was the dispatch log. The Meridian auto-scan alert on Camille's plates had been generated at 6:43 p.m. Standard protocol required the system to cross-reference any government plate alert against the county's manual verification database before issuing a detain instruction. That cross-reference had been completed at 6:44 p.m., 1 minute after the alert was generated, and it had returned a single result. False positive. Government plate formatting error. No action required. That clearance had been logged in the system at 6:44 p.m. Trent had pulled out behind Camille's vehicle at 6:45 p.m. He had made the stop 1 minute after the system had already told him not to. Price read that log 3 times before he called his supervisor. The gap between 6:44 and 6:45 was 60 seconds. 1 minute was all it would have taken. One glance at the confirmation screen that was sitting on the same dashboard as the alert would have ended the entire thing before it started. Trent hadn't looked. He had seen the alert, made his decision, and moved. And because he moved before the system finished its own process, a Chief Justice had spent 34 minutes sitting in the back of a patrol car outside her own home while her neighbors stood on their lawns and watched. When Price pulled Trent's stop record for the previous 6 months, the picture got worse very quickly. Of the 43 stops Trent had made using auto-scan alerts in the Crestwood Gate corridor, 31 of them had involved vehicles driven by black residents. The Crestwood Gate neighborhood's black residential population was 19%. Price cross-referenced those 31 stops against the dispatch logs. 17 of them had alerts that had either been cleared or flagged as unverified before the stop was made. Trent had made them anyway, and in every single case his report had used the same language. Probable fraud risk, non-compliant behavior, alert confirmed at time of stop. His supervisors had signed off on every one of them without pulling a single dispatch log to check. The system hadn't failed that Thursday evening on Hargrove Terrace. It had worked exactly as it had been allowed to work for at least 6 months. Camille's stop hadn't created the problem. It had just finally produced a subject whose name, title, and 34 minutes of dashcam footage made the problem impossible to file away. Price closed his laptop, picked up his phone, and made the kind of call that ends careers. Trent Colby was placed on immediate suspension without pay 4 days after Price made his call. The department's official statement described it as a precautionary administrative measure pending investigation, which is the language institutions use when they already know the outcome but aren't ready to announce it yet. His termination was confirmed 19 days later. The letter cited conduct unbecoming, procedural violations, and falsification of stop documentation. That last one was the one that mattered most, because it meant that what he had been doing wasn't just sloppy police work. It was deliberate misrepresentation filed under oath and approved by supervisors who either didn't check or didn't want to. Bowen received a formal suspension of 30 days and a permanent note in his personnel file. His union filed a grievance on his behalf. The grievance was reviewed, considered, and denied. He was reassigned out of the Crestwood Gate corridor and placed on administrative desk duty pending a conduct review that his union was told could take up to 8 months. For a man who had built his entire professional identity around being in the field, that reassignment was its own kind of consequence. The supervisors who had signed off on Trent's stop reports without pulling dispatch logs were a harder problem to resolve cleanly, because there were 3 of them, and because the paperwork trail showed a pattern of approval that stretched back further than 6 months. 2 of them accepted negotiated demotions as part of the internal settlement process. The 3rd retired before the formal review was completed, which the department allowed, and which the Oversight Board noted in its final report with language that made clear they considered it inadequate. The Meridian Autoscan system was suspended from active use in Halden County within 2 weeks of Price's report reaching the county commissioner's office. The vendor was formally notified that their contract was under review. An independent audit of every stop made using Autoscan alerts in the county over the previous 18 months was commissioned. And the results of that audit, released 4 months later, identified 63 stops where the alert had been cleared before the stop was made. 41 of those stops had involved black drivers. The audit report used the word systemic 4 times in its executive summary and did not apologize for it. The Federal Civil Rights Division opened a formal inquiry into the Halden County Sheriff's Patrol Division 8 weeks after the footage became public. It was not a quick process, and it was not designed to be. Federal inquiries of that kind move deliberately because the findings have to be airtight before they can be acted on. But the inquiry was open, it was staffed, and people inside the department knew it was there every single day they came to work. The civil settlement reached by Camille's legal team came in at just under $900,000. The county did not admit liability in the settlement language, which is standard, and which Camille's attorneys noted publicly was not the same thing as the county being without liability. The money was one part of it. The other part was a court-monitored consent decree requiring the department to implement mandatory dispatch verification before any technology-generated detain instruction could be acted on. With supervisory sign-off required in real time rather than after the fact, Camille returned to her courtroom the Monday after the settlement was announced. She walked in, sat down, and called the first case of the day. She didn't make a speech. She didn't hold a press conference. She had said what needed to be said through her attorneys, and before that, through 34 minutes of dashcam footage that had done the talking more effectively than any statement she could have written. The truth does not always arrive loudly. Sometimes it arrives in a dispatch log timestamp, 60 seconds that nobody checked, and a camera that was running the whole time. If this story made you think about how many times this happened to someone without a title, without a dash cam, and without a neighbor who came outside, then you already understand what this channel is for. Resurrected Justice exists because the truth needs a place to land. Hit the like button, share this with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe if you haven't already. Every story on this channel is real in the ways that matter most. We will see you in the next one.